All right, guys. So we're back with another Q&A this week. Got a fun one to kind of cover today. One that there is a pretty clear divide between the two strategies. So kind of touch on some thoughts that go over reverse dieting in comparison to recovery dieting. So I think that a good place to start is looking at differences between individuals.
Yeah, so and just to define like the reverse diet, recovery diet, I think that's important. So there is one approach where you're coming out of a show or even a dieting phase, and do you slowly bring up calories over time, just as if you were bringing down calories in your dieting phase, which would be more of a reverse dieting, adding food in a slow rate. Or there's also been coined a term like a recovery diet, where we have a large increase initially to get maybe close to a maintenance slight surplus, bring body fat up quicker. And then at that point, once you get more stabilized, then you start slowly adding in calories. So this is the difference between your like reverse diet versus more of just like this quicker, some people coin it recovery diet. But coming to the show, the first things addressed is really where you're at mentally, psychologically, how taxing this contest prep has been. And so what are you going to be able to be adherent to? I think that is key.
And I think that the two main differences we typically see coming out of this is one, very type A, detail-oriented, like individuals that want to cover every detail coming out of their show because they see it as a stepping stone into their next one, whenever that may be. Or it may just be their personality characteristics. And then you have the individuals that compete that are a little bit more free-spirited, ready for the freedom, things along those lines. And the way that you approach those two psychological characteristics is a lot different, right? So for me, one thing that I'm looking at is I can probably be a little bit more aggressive on the initial setup for someone that's type A than someone who is a little bit on the free-spirited side. And the reason that I say that is that every detail is going to be accounted for, whether it's cardio, training, what food they put in their mouth, things like that when it comes to the type A individualistic. And there's probably more metrics I can track, right? These individuals are probably not only tracking scale weight and thin pictures, but they're tracking blood glucose levels, they're tracking measurements, things along those lines. So every detail is accounted for, so I can be a little bit more aggressive and fix according to how they change from a week-to-week basis. Now, when we get into the little bit of free spirit side, I'm probably maybe writing a base plan for them to follow and look at, but giving them macros within each meal so that they can make the substitutions as needed, right? Allow them to make substitutions here and there. And substitutions are good whether you're type A or free, but making it a point to detail out not only the macros of the meal plan, but the macros within each meal so that they see how it's dispersed throughout the day and they can fluctuate foods in and out and not fall off the bandwagon, which is common to see with those people that just kind of want to get back into the freedom of, everyday life after a contest prep. So this allows them to experience that freedom and flexibility without having them tip off the scale. Allows them to go eat out, track the macros of the meals they eat out with estimations, whether the restaurant posts the calories or not, and typically ends up in a better result. Now, with that being said, I'm probably a little bit less aggressive with the calorie jump with them from the get-go because there's going to be little things included that they may not be mentioning or may not be bringing up that could affect the total calories for the day.
Yeah, I feel like there's almost a balance that you need to make with each of this, like, because we kind of have these two individuals, but also there's some like middle ground as well, like the one that wants the strict plan and is willing to do anything and everything you say to the T, and the other one that can't wait to get back to this lifestyle that's the farthest thing from prep, right? Yeah. So you have like whatever you want to call them, like the nerd and the free spirit. And the nerd you have to watch out for because they can burn themselves out. It's like, no, go. And that's usually the person that's kind of all or nothing as well. So they might just all of a sudden fly off the bandwagon because they don't realize how post-show is really going to react for them. While you have our free spirit over here who's just not going to follow a plan at all. So you have to develop the plan that can work for both these individuals. You have to give that OCD guy structure, but also maybe force him to make sure he has some flexibility in his diet to get out and go have some enjoyment and fun because he's out of a post-contest period. I think that will help him have that longevity. But then also with your your free-spirited dieter, you need to get them some type of structure, like you're saying, Luke, but definitely have them be able to work around macros and work with them and say, what are you willing to do? What are you, will you count your macros? And if you can get them to agree to something like it was their idea, well, that's will help go a long way too. So between those individuals, that's how you should, I think, structure it. And then there's also that's the mental side of it, but then there's the physical component as well. And coming from a contest prep phase, like if you've been on prep for 30 plus weeks, is it ideal to stay in a calorie, because essentially like reverse dieting, you might still stay in a lower calorie deficit initially those first weeks before bringing it back up. And that's might not really be ideal at all. I personally, I don't like the idea of reverse dieting, because I think you need to bring someone back up to a maintenance calorie surplus and restore hormone functions to bring off some of these diet adaptations that have occurred throughout this whole process, bring down fatigue. I kind of lean more towards that recovery style. So, that initial boost, I think regardless if it's been a really long, hard prep or even a shorter one, there should be a good boost in calories out the gate to alleviate some of these physical detriments that have occurred. And I think you alleviate some of the mental ones as well that are going to make it more challenging to be adherent to diet.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I do have more tendencies to go towards the recovery diet as well, being more aggressive out of the gate. Now, just to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, the only time that I will maybe go towards the recovery diet is if someone falls off the bandwagon the first week, or like just eats like an asshole the first week after a show, and the amount of body weight that's added within that week is exorbitant, right? Like, so, for example, like and I won't mention any names, I had a client come to me that prepped with a different coach. And about 2 weeks after their show, they were experiencing a lot of edema. Body weight had jumped like 25 pounds on a female. And I was like, okay, we need to bring it a step back, right? So bring them back into that little bit of a smaller deficit and control some of these things that are happening before we bring them back up, right? But in the end all be all, the point that you made about the goal here is to restore the negative adaptations that occurred from the contest prep should be the primary goal, because we've seen some case studies where restoration of these hormones takes 4, 5, 6, 7 months just to restore these things, right? So if we're not taking the right steps in order to get that ghrelin leptin balance back in place, right? Get thyroid function back up and people on those natures, then we're not setting these individuals up not only for whether this is an individual that wants to compete long term or just wanted to do it once, into a lifestyle that they're going to be able to maintain and or continue to make progress. So then that kind of plays into what's optimal.
Yeah, and just like you said, to keep in mind, it's not just about increasing your calories up to this level, it's also body fat levels as well. So we do have some studies showing like these adaptations really aren't restored till you reach back up to this certain body fat level. So you're staying lean and calories are up, you still might not be recovering optimally. But what is this optimal? And what I tend to look at is someone, what I was usually doing for someone's like peak week carb up and even refeed days, then looking at what they were doing for their base plan and kind of their rate of loss, and usually meeting somewhere in the middle there. A lot of people rev up post show, and you just have to watch them day by day and closely. Or if you're coaching yourself, have them check in frequently. Don't all of a sudden go to once a week check-ins, because things will change very rapidly after the show. So I've even, myself, post show, you go out and eat, you have meals, and you're up like 10 pounds. Well, maybe the first few days I'll have a lower food intake to bring off some water. Then I'll go into my, my post show diet, which is usually something in the middle, or it could be right at what I was carbing up for a show. And I'll just watch myself. If weight gain's dramatic and I'm holding water, well, then I adjust back. I think within that first week, you're probably looking at, to get at least 5 pounds over stage weight or so,
Yeah.
to try to give some type of number on it. Then beyond that, I would say that maybe 1% weight gain per week back to when you're in you start seeing some of those adaptations reduce. And for a lot of people that I see, it's usually that 6 to 8 week mark is when finally like sleep is getting normalized, libido is getting normalized,
Yeah.
the ravenous appetite is decreasing, and hunger is kind of normalized. And then all of a sudden you start seeing the shift of that food intake is not burning through them as quickly, and maybe weight of rate gain is increasing at the same food level. That's when I would say to start, you might need to be backing food off at that point. And you can, because that person would also be, have good hunger and appetite control. And then you can just proceed with your normal off season from there.
And the factor of this being so individual is very important to understand, right? So there is no set approach or protocol or anything along those lines, right? This is all going to be very individualistic in nature. Maybe it may be beneficial. I think I just kind of want to walk through maybe kind of some of the stuff we did for mine, just in a real quick nature to kind of break it down into some details. So when I came out of my show, I was like 200 pounds on stage around. And we went so for the check-ins part, I was checking in with John every third or fourth day. I lean more towards the type A, very detailed type of an individual. So there was a bunch of metrics I was tracking. We were actually able to go pretty aggressive because the first plan that we had set up kept me right at like 203, 202 most of the week. And then after that week, my weight started to dip back down. So we had gotten me back to a point where things were firing on all cylinders. Training was going well. I wasn't feeling like shit anymore. So my calorie jumps throughout my dieting phase were, rather aggressive. And if I remember correctly, like some of those first changes were 500, 600, 700 calories within those first few weeks. But to his point, right, if there is a certain rate of weight gain occurring on a diet that's consistent, you need to be overly aggressive with it, right? Those twice a week check-ins kind of ended for me at like 4 weeks post-show, 3 weeks, 4 weeks post-show. And some of the metrics that I was tracking, I wasn't necessarily reporting back every time, right? But I still keep an eye on them until maybe a problem arose, right? So like, for example, one thing I still do that I don't always put in my check-ins is I do track blood glucose levels, but just because I understand where my fasting blood glucose and my postprandial blood glucose needs to be, unless I see an issue occurring, I'm not overly trying to bog John down with details that he needs to read when he has 100 emails to read a day. So that attention to detail can kind of, as you go through the off season, be something that you still do, but not necessarily like the changes aren't going to be as drastic as we get further away and things along those natures, right? So that's kind of like a setup of how we went about it. And I know that's going to be very different for every individual, especially different, psychological characteristic trait type people. But that kind of breaks it down. And I think one thing to note is, I think a good thing to do the entire off season is tracking caliper measurements and or tape measurements, because I think that's how you're going to be able to control where your body fat percentage is and the rate of weight gain according to the rate of body fat accrual that you're occurring.
Yeah, I do think tracking like your measurements and caliper measures, it gives you some good objective measures to look at to see, where is the size really coming for. That might be also a good metric to use for your training. If your arms aren't growing or they're not moving at all, maybe you need to reevaluate your training approach too. And it does give a good accountability for people that have a hard time post-show flying off the bandwagon. Even stepping on a scale, you're like, oh my gosh, I gained 5 pounds yesterday off my cheat meal. Like, I'm going to tighten my shit up today. Like that, people do that. And so I think it's just one more way to be a little bit accountable for tracking your measurements. And you're like, oh my gosh, my waist is increasing. I really got to stop what I'm doing here. But of course it's like getting them to actually make the decision to do that and implement that type of measurement process. For Luke, like I know he's one that's I would have to force him to go take a cheat meal, and even if it was a cheat meal, it'd be like, no, I'm going to make it at home and control every macronutrient. So that's like for him, like I could like keep a little bit more hands off and just let him go and not check in as frequently. But for other clients, like I have to stay on them and make sure like I keep them checking in so their accountability is there, and I can really monitor and make the right adjustments that they need, and change the plan up for whatever their situation is. So, but I think that I think that addresses, like, kind of touches on it without really getting into. We couldn't get into real specifics because it is very individual. But I hope that's the takeaway, is
Yeah.
that when you're first coming out of a show diet, cutting diet, evaluate where you are in your prep. How long has it been? What is your current mental state and psychological state? Are you very driven emotionally to eat? Do you have a lot of sleep derangements? Are you, libido's jacked, you're starving, appetite out of control? Well, maybe the super structured plan should be in place, but you should build in some flexibility for yourself. Of course, optimally make sure you're tracking your variables, watching the scale weight increase, keep taking your pictures, caliper measurements, monitoring blood glucose, and tape measures are all good ways to make sure that you're keeping your rate of weight gain at a good thing. So,
And your sensitivity to food and your response
definitely.
to training, right? So yeah, that kind of covers it all. So perfect cover there. If y'all have any questions, feel free to comment on the post below.